Picture this. You're standing in a Roman marketplace. Around the year 300 AD, in your hand you're holding what should be a silver denarius, the pride of Roman power for over 5 centuries. But when you bite down on it, your teeth hit copper. The silver flakes off like cheap paint. The merchant across the stall laughs bitterly. "That coin?" he says. "I'd need a wheelbarrow of those just to buy a loaf of bread." You'll look around and it's chaos. People clutching bags full of coins that nobody wants. Merchants refusing to sell. The empire that once ruled the world can't even buy its own bread. But why? Why did the richest empire on earth suddenly find its money worthless? Was it war? Politics? Corruption? No. It was something quieter, slower, deadlier. Rome didn't collapse from the outside. It rotted from within because it destroyed the one thing holding its civilization together: trust in its money. And here's the uncomfortable part. We're doing the exact same thing today. Let's rewind to 211 BC. Rome is bleeding. Hannibal and his war elephants are tearing through Italy. The Republic needs cash, so Rome creates something revolutionary, the silver denarius. But why was this so powerful? Because it wasn't just metal. It was a promise. Each denarius held 4.5 grams of nearly pure silver, 95 to 98%. That meant when a Roman soldier got paid, he wasn't getting paper, or faith, or hope. He was getting value. And why did that matter? Because money's only useful if people believe in it. For nearly 300 years, this tiny silver coin carried the weight of an empire. It paid for roads, armies, aqueducts, everything that made Rome, Rome. But here's the twist. The real power of the denarius wasn't in the silver. It was in trust. People trusted that each coin had real, tangible value. That trust made trade flow, made soldiers fight, made empires rise. But trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it never returns the same way. Fast forward to 64 AD, Rome burns. The Great Fire has gutted the city. Wars are emptying the treasury. Nero needs money now. He could raise taxes. He could cut spending. He could make hard choices. But why do that when there's an easier way? So Nero tries something that looks like genius but feels like cheating. He orders the mints to reduce the silver content of the denarius from 98% to 90%. Now why would that matter? Because suddenly, Rome could mint more coins without finding more silver. For every million denarii collected, Nero could now produce 1.2 million. It looked like magic. Instant money. Instant wealth. But magic always comes with a cost. Nero wasn't creating wealth. He was diluting it. Every shiny new coin he made quietly stole value from the old ones. But why would anyone notice? Because over time, prices rose. Bread cost more, soldiers demanded higher pay. Merchants stopped trusting Roman money. And that's the real secret of economic collapse. It never begins with fire, it begins with fraud. And here's the scary part, Nero's trick actually worked. At least in the beginning. The Roman people kept using the coins. Why wouldn't they? They looked the same, felt the same, even carried the emperor's face stamped in silver. But here's the catch. Appearances lie. The silver was gone, and trust was bleeding out slowly, invisibly. The ordinary citizen didn't notice. But the money changers did. The merchants who handled thousands of coins every day, they could feel the difference. And once they lose trust, the entire system begins to decay from within. But why? Because currency isn't just metal, it's psychology. And psychology runs on belief. Once people start questioning what their money is really worth, every transaction becomes a negotiation, not an exchange. That's when faith dies. And here's the insidious thing about debasement. Once you start, you can't stop. Why? Because the benefits are immediate and visible. The government suddenly has more money, but the costs, they're hidden and delayed. Every emperor after Nero faced the same temptation. Wars to fund, monuments to build, bureaucrats to pay. And every time the treasury ran dry, the answer was the same. Just reduce the silver a little more. Watch how fast this spiral accelerated. Under Trajan in 117 AD, silver dropped to 85%. Under Marcus Aurelius, to 75%. By the time of Septimius Severus, barely half of it was silver. But the emperors weren't just stealing silver, they were stealing time. Each debasement was a hidden tax on the future, a silent promise that someone else decades later would pay for today's luxury. But why does this always end badly? Because you can borrow from the future only so long before the future stops lending. And when that happens, the bill comes due in the form of collapse. By 250 AD, Rome was drowning. Barbarian invasions, civil wars, economic freefall, 24 emperors in 50 years and 84% of them met violent deaths. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The chaos was indeed the cause of Rome's collapse. It was the symptom. Why? Because by this point, Rome's real foundation, its money, was already gone. By 300 AD, the once proud silver denarius contained less than 2% silver. It had become a copper coin with a thin silver skin that rubbed off between your fingers. Citizens were literally carrying fake money. Think about that. In just 250 years, Rome went from 98% silver to 98% copper. That's not just economic decay, that's civilizational rot. When money dies, the moral order dies with it. By the end, the Roman mints weren't minting coins, they were minting lies. Official government counterfeits. Silver so thin, it would vanish with a thumbprint, and everyone knew it. When the currency becomes worthless, everything else follows. The numbers tell the story better than words. At Rome's height, 2 cups of wine cost 1/8 of a denarius. By 301 AD, even after price controls, that same wine costs 8 debased denarii. That's a 6,300% inflation rate. But it gets worse. By the empire's end, 1 gold solidus, a coin introduced to replace the denarius, could buy millions of the old silver coins. The currency that built the empire had become literal trash. And in desperation, Emperor Diocletian tried to force stability through terror. He issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the cost of over 1,000 goods. Break the rule, and you die. But why didn't it work? Because you can't control prices when the money itself is broken. That's like trying to stop a flood with a screen door. The military, once Rome's backbone, collapsed next. Why fight for pay that buys nothing? Soldiers stopped defending Rome and started looting it. The empire's protectors became its predators. Trade disintegrated. Cities emptied. And a complex economy that once spanned continents crumbled into barter and chaos. Rome didn't just lose its money, it lost its future. Because when trust dies in your currency, it doesn't just destroy your economy, it destroys your civilization. Rome had destroyed its currency, and with it, its civilization. But here's the question no one asks. Did we ever learn from it? Fast forward 17 centuries. It's August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon appears on television. His voice calm, his face confident, and with a single sentence, he detonates the foundation of the global economy. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. But why is it that every temporary government policy somehow becomes permanent? Just like Nero's temporary debasement, Nixon's suspension has lasted more than 50 years. In that moment, Nixon did to the dollar what the Roman emperors did to the denarius. He severed the link between money and reality. He turned the world's reserve currency into pure fiat value by decree, not by truth. But why does that matter? Because when money is backed by nothing, it can be created without limit. And when creation has no limit, destruction has no boundary. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. What costs $1 that now costs? Nearly 8. But why call it inflation when it's really debasement? Because inflation sounds natural, almost harmless like weather. Debasement, on the other hand, implies intent. It exposes that this isn't a market accident, it's policy. And here's where it gets chilling. In 2024, America spent $881 billion just on interest payments, more than its military budget. Let that sink in. We're paying more to service past debt than to protect our future. But why is that such a fatal signal? Because Rome faced the same spiral. When the empire spent more on debt and bureaucracy than on defense, the borders fell. We're repeating that rhythm. Debt first, decline next. Here's where the numbers stop being statistics and start being horror stories. In 2020 alone, the United States created $3.4 trillion of new money. That's 20% of all dollars in existence, conjured in 1 year. But why should that terrify you? Because in real terms, that means every dollar you owned before 2020 quietly lost value overnight. The total money supply M2 has exploded from $4.6 trillion in 2000 to over $21 trillion today. We've printed more dollars in the last 20 years than in the previous 2 centuries combined. Rome had to melt coins, dilute silver, and hope people wouldn't notice. We just add zeros to a computer. It's faster, cleaner, and far more dangerous. But the laws of economics haven't changed since the days of Caesar. When you create money from nothing, you don't create wealth. You transfer it. From whom? From everyone holding the currency. To everyone getting the new money first. Governments, banks, and the connected elite. That's not growth. That's theft. Legalized and invisible. Historian Niall Ferguson calls it Ferguson's Law. Any great power that spends more on servicing its debt than on its defense ceases to be a great power. And America has crossed that line. Our national debt now exceeds $37 trillion, roughly $250,000 per household. By 2035, it's projected to reach $52 trillion. But why is this unsustainable? Because as interest rates rise, the debt compounds faster than growth. You borrow money to pay the interest on money you've already borrowed? That's not policy, that's a death spiral. It's exactly what happened to Rome. When an empire spends everything on yesterday's promises, there's nothing left for tomorrow's survival. You might think, this is dramatic. America isn't Rome. But let's look at the evidence. Germany, 1920s. Prices doubled every 3.7 days. Wheelbarrows of cash for a single loaf of bread. The mark became worthless paper. Zimbabwe, 2000s. Inflation hit 79% per month. A $100 trillion note couldn't buy breakfast. Venezuela, 2010s. Inflation exceeded 1,000,000%. People fled the country carrying gold, food, anything but their own money. But why do these stories sound so familiar? Because the pattern is always identical. Currency debasement gives loss of confidence, gives collapse. Rome did it with silver. We're doing it with screens. Here's the dark truth. Debasement is a drug. Each dose brings temporary relief, but worsens the addiction. Rome began with Nero's 10% dilution. By the end, coins were 98% copper. America began with Nixon's temporary gold suspension. Now we print trillions annually to stay afloat. But why can't we stop? Because stopping would mean withdrawal and political suicide. The cycle always follows 5 stages. 1. Crisis sparks temporary debasement. 2. Inflation quietly erodes value. 3. Public trust collapses. 4. More debasement to fix the problem. 5. Total breakdown and currency death. We are now between stages 3 and 4. But here's what's truly sinister. Debasement doesn't just destroy economies, it reshapes society. In Rome, the wealthy survived by owning land, gold, and slaves. The poor, holding devalued coins, lost everything. Today, it's no different. Those with assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, thrive under inflation. But wage earners, retirees, and savers bleed silently. Why? Because inflation isn't a tax on spending. It's a tax on trust. And it's the only tax where the poor pay more than the rich. Rome's fall wasn't just economic, it was psychological. When money dies, institutions die next. By the 3rd century, Rome couldn't fund its armies, pay its bureaucrats, or maintain its roads. Civil wars and assassinations followed. But those weren't causes, they were symptoms. And look around today. Political polarization, collapsing faith in institutions, social unrest, different empire, same disease. When people stop believing in their money, they stop believing in each other. But here's the most frightening difference of all. Rome's collapse was local. The world moved on. But the dollar? The dollar is the world. It's the reserve currency, the denominator of trade, the heartbeat of global finance. If it falls, everything tied to it falls too, from oil prices to food supply chains to entire national economies. But why risk it all? Because every empire believes it's invincible right up until it isn't. We're not just gambling with America's future. We're gambling with civilization's foundation, and history has already shown how that story ends. So, is there hope? Can this death spiral actually be stopped? History says yes, but not without pain. Because here's the thing. Economies rarely heal themselves. They have to be rebuilt. When Constantine the Great took power, he was staring at the ruins of a once mighty empire. Rome's currency had become a joke, a symbol of lost trust. So what did he do? He introduced the gold solidus in 312 AD, a pure, uncorrupted coin that restored faith in the system. But why did this work? Because gold wasn't just metal. It was credibility in physical form. People don't trust words printed on paper. They trust scarcity. The solidus became that symbol of scarcity, something real in a world drowning in fakes. But even Constantine knew that sound money alone isn't enough. You can't fix an empire just by changing its coins. You have to reform the behavior that broke it in the first place. That's the part most modern leaders miss. Because why would they ever give up the easiest power known to man? The power to print money. For America, real reform would mean enforcing constitutional limits on deficit spending, returning to asset-backed money, cutting massive government expenses, and dismantling the Federal Reserve's ability to conjure dollars out of thin air. But let's be honest, that's political suicide. Why? Because it forces short-term pain for long-term stability. And politicians don't think in centuries, they think in election cycles. So where does that leave you and me? If the system won't protect you, you protect yourself. Own real assets. Gold, silver, Bitcoin, productive land, skills that can't be inflated away. But why real assets? Because they don't vanish when confidence does. They hold value when promises collapse, diversify across currencies and borders. But why? Because when governments lose control, they grab whatever's still standing through taxes, restrictions, or outright confiscation. History's full of those examples. And most importantly, get educated. Because why do most people get wiped out in a crisis? Not because they're unlucky, but because they're unaware. Those who survive are the ones who saw it coming. But here's what makes our era different. Rome's collapse took 250 years. They had to mine silver, melt it, mint coins, a slow decay. We don't have that luxury. Modern money is digital. It can vanish at the speed of Wi-Fi. Germany's hyperinflation took a few years. Zimbabwe's took a decade. Venezuela's months. But America? If confidence breaks, the collapse could unfold in weeks. Because in a digital economy, panic travels at the speed of light. So, are we doomed? Not necessarily. Because collapse isn't the end, it's a reset. After every monetary failure, societies rebuild stronger. After Rome, came Byzantium. After Germany's hyperinflation, came the Rentenmark. After every crisis, those who embraced sound money principles rose again. But the question isn't if this renewal happens, it's when and who will be ready for it. Right now, America stands at the same fork Rome once faced. We can either keep pretending that printing solves problems, or accept the pain of reform and rebuild the foundation. But every day of denial adds another crack to the system. Rome didn't fall to barbarians, it fell because it destroyed trust in its own money. Each emperor thought he was fixing a temporary problem, but each fix made the next collapse inevitable. And since 1971, when Nixon cut the dollar's link to gold, America's been writing the same script. Debt, inflation, illusion. Why? Because when you give any government the power to create money without limits, they will always use it. It's human nature dressed in authority. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And right now, the rhyme sounds eerily familiar. Rome, Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and now, maybe, America. The only real question left is, will we learn from history, or will we, once again, pay the price to relearn what it already taught us?